This is Auteur Detour, wherein three film lovers travel through the filmographies of cinema's most important directors in hopes of finding a greater understanding on the other side.
Welcome back, everyone, to Auteur Detour. Good to have you all. I'm Chris Balaza. I'm here, as always, with Ian Hinckley.
Hi, I'm Ian Hinckley.
And Travis White.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, yeah.
The coolest of cool.
In this episode, of course, we are discussing Children of Men. Released in 2006, Children of Men is the sixth feature film from director Alfonso Cuaron. In the dystopian world of 2027, the human race has been cast into a state of upheaval, disarray, and depression. There's not been a human being born in 18 years, and entire countries have broken down as the world descends into despair. Immigrants flock to England, one of the last remaining organized governments, where many are rounded up into refugee camps. Protagonist Theo Farron, played by Clive Owen, is a former immigrants' rights activist turned disillusioned bureaucrat who is approached by a resistance group led by his ex-wife Julian, played by Julian Moore. He is asked to secure transit papers for the resistance's best-kept secret and humanity's last hope for survival, a refugee named Key, the first known pregnant woman in 18 years. Theo eventually is tasked with escorting Key to the coast, where she will be cared for by the fabled Human Project, a group dedicated to curing the global infertility epidemic. Now, personally, my second viewing of this movie had me less, engaged from a storyline perspective, but its biggest strength in this is the world that the movie inhabits. It feels really real, it feels hopeless, and it feels like we're really a part of it. This movie has some of the most intense long takes of any movie I've ever seen, literally. And Emmanuel Lubezki's cinematography sinks you so deep into the world of the movie that it makes you feel like you could be hit with a stray bullet or a piece of shrapnel at any given time. After watching this movie, it becomes clear to me that Cuaron can make literally any kind of movie he wants, be it a raunchy sex farce, a buddy road trip comedy movie, a children's fairy tale, a magical otherworldly fantasy, or a bleak dystopian future. Cuaron now has it all in his tool belt. So, Children of Men, guys, what do you think?
I fucking love it.
If we had waited just 5 more years to do this season of this podcast, we could have watched it in 2027 when it takes place. That was my big takeaway. I'm like, we're basically there. Jenny and I watched this movie early on in the pandemic, and this was like still when like Trump was president, and like a lot of that really terrible anti-immigrant like rhetoric was still kind of like at the front of the news and stuff like that. People were still concerned about, children in cages at the border, who are still there, but you just don't hear about this much. But it was crazy, like, having seen this in 2006 when it came out in theaters, and then and watching it later, and it's like the trite, observation of like, it's even more, like powerful today than it was, but it really was. I mean, like, I think people who were paying attention to like political trends back then could see where this was all going, and then it felt like it was like watching it felt like it was like seeing like the worst possible like ending to humanity's story like coming true, and yeah, it was real dark.
Yeah, I had that. I mean, like you said, it's a short observation, but it's fucking real. Like, I had that same thing where I'm like, how the fuck did this movie get made not this week? Because it's so, there's so much of it that's just like
ripped from the headlines.
Yeah, ripped from the headlines. And I mean, one of the things that we've talked about it a lot over all of his movies, but watching this movie gave me such a new appreciation for how political Cuarón is as a filmmaker.
Yes.
Like, obviously this is probably his most overtly political movie, at least up to this point, but actually Y Tu Mamá También actually is right there with it, which this movie shares a lot in common with, and I want to get into that more, but it was definitely like, Travis, you can't do that while I'm trying to talk. He's like shaking his moneymaker. Sorry.
I'm not allowed to dance.
Yeah.
I'm being silenced.
I don't know. I just love, like, we'll get into it, I think, in a couple episodes more when I do my final Cuaron wrap up. But it really, I came into him as a filmmaker in this first episode of the series, thinking of him as more of like a filmmaker that's more interested in pushing filmmaking forward as a medium, and we talked about that. And that's obviously true, and especially with, Gravity coming up next. And it really just blew me away this time watching this, of just like how much he cares about, his philosophy is on display. And it is that thing that you brought up right away in Little Princess about like how, like, he wants a better world for us. He's such an optimist. And it's interesting to do him so quick, like, as after we did the Coens, which, like, they have almost opposite filmmaking or philosophies, not filmmaking philosophies, but philosophies maybe. I don't know. This movie just blew me away with how political it was and how right on it was, I mean, it's obviously like, it shows a lot of truth. I was reading a interview with him, and, he said that he wanted to make this movie because, like, I'll read the thing that he said, if I can look at my notes and find it. He said, because America has turned from a land of immigrants to isolationist zealots. Like, that was his, like, pretty hardcore comment that he made. And, like, it feels like that in this movie.
Yeah.
Definitely. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You said America?
He said America, yeah.
Right.
Which is, he had moved to London at this point and was filming it from England. But, of course, it's based on a book. That's part of it. But, like, his reason for wanting to make it was, I'm sure it was like a worldwide sort of consciousness about immigration that was happening. It's clearly a problem in England also. But that's what he said in the quote,
Yeah, I mean, we often see children or kids or babies or things like that in movies used kind of as props for moving a movie forward. Like there's even a joke movie starring Clive Owen about a baby called Shoot 'Em Up, where it's literally like the baby is the MacGuffin and he's got to like protect the baby, and it's like it's just totally ridiculous, Or
I should have made that. I should have made that the thumbnail. I never saw that movie. I didn't know.
No, yours is perfect.
You should watch that movie. I love that movie.
It's so it's so ridiculous. But the whole idea being like it's children can be like the MacGuffin, the prop to push the movie forward. And Cuaron toes that line really well because it doesn't feel like that at all. It's actually not about children or about kids or anything like that. In the end, it's more about how we use maybe fear to control people and to how that's used as an oppressive tool, I think, by larger scale governments. So obviously we don't see any children except for the actual baby itself when it's born, and it just really unfolds organically without feeling like it's being like pandering, or it's like it's using this child as a prop for like furthering anything like that. I don't know, it just felt like it unfolded really naturally, despite me, like I said, the storyline itself this time was like, I don't know.
I think that's crazy. I loved the storyline. I was totally on the opposite side of that.
I think it's the ending. It's kind of anticlimactic in a way. It just kind of sort of happens. It's engaging, but like I said, the movie's strengths are the fact that like I took so few notes, like physical notes this time, just because I just can't stop looking at this movie. Like what's going to happen next? The cinematography just really sinks you into it. Like I said earlier, it's just fully engrossing, even if the story, in my humble opinion, isn't one that really would otherwise have fully grabbed me in another context, I think.
Well, when you say the story, sorry, Travis, I mean, you mentioned the ending being ambiguous. I don't think it's really ambiguous. It's but is that the part that bothered you? Because like, it's it's almost the story of Y Tu Mamá También. I'll go back to it because it's like the road part of it where it's these people trying to find this sort of beach that they don't know whether or not it exists, and then meeting people along the way. And like, I don't know, I feel like obviously it's way different in structure, but like it's got the same kind of bones there of like traveling through this completely torn apart country by class, and then like seeing that along the way, and they are searching for this thing that they kind of invented, and that maybe they invented and maybe doesn't exist,
Right.
Speaking to the end, I mentioned like early on that like a lot of his movies like end in the water or end at a beach, and like this beach represents this like untold possible future, right? Like of humanity that could be better, and it is very much like Y Tu Mamá También, like you're saying, this like kind of road trip across, this like class divided society. At the end, when the boat from the Tomorrow Project comes, the shots of that boat, I think the people may or may not be moving in like slow motion. No other shot in the movie looks like that. Like it is very fantastical, right? Is that what you were referring to when you said the ending wasn't ambiguous? Did you take it as a happy ending? It's sort of like a weird. I kind of agree with what Chris said about it being sort of anticlimactic.
I said anticlimactic, not ambiguous. I think it's pretty
Right,
straightforward.
I agree, but I kind of agree with both of those. I think it is kind of like the boat's coming, and it's not like the music doesn't like, the score isn't like, yay, the boat is here. You know what I mean? It's very much like, is the boat coming?
I didn't mean that it's not ambiguous. I just meant that that's the right way for it to end. Like, I don't think that it...
No, but I'm asking you, what did you think of the ending? Like,
I loved it. I thought it was... No, I don't. I do think it's ambiguous. Not ambiguous, but it's whatever the word you just said was, because I'm never going to remember it.
Ambiguous. And Chris said anticlimactic.
Anticlimactic. I don't think it's anticlimactic. I think that it's...
I'm trying to think of a third word that I can throw in to make it more confusing. I think it was both anticlimactic and ambiguous, and it's sort of left to you to be like, what happens now? I think the climax of the movie is really when the baby is born and the soldiers see it, and in that moment everybody stops fighting. Like the baby, it's not a prop, right, like you were saying, I guess, but it's like it is like a symbol of like, oh shit, like life is like this insanely precious thing. Right. And Chris, you brought up earlier, like I've been listening to our old episodes, and like it's been reminding me of all these great points you guys made earlier. But like Chris, like the theme of just the importance of like life going forward and like fighting to stay alive, like in Alfonso Cuarón's films, and that moment where you think that the like power of human life, the preciousness of human life is gonna like make the soldiers stop fighting, and it does for like this magical moment, and then the moment's kind of broken, and then it goes back like just even in this kind of miraculous moment where like it's like, oh, we might have a hope, bullets start flying right around this baby, and it's just we're just gonna keep like ignoring this, you know what I mean?
And
like,
I think that's what I mean when I say it's not anticlimactic, is because to me, obviously it's not, the finale isn't this powerhouse in that moment, but the movie is asking the question, like, the whole movie is so fucking hopeless. Like, there's no, his character is building hope through the movie. Like, he starts with no hope, and then he finally sort of ends the movie with hope. To me, like, the climax of the movie is a mental climax, It's like, how do you end this movie if you're not ending it with like, okay, maybe there's a chance. Like that's the only way to end this movie. It was like, okay, maybe there's something. They can't just fucking drift off into the water and that was the ending. That would be so depressing. Like they have to have the Tomorrow boat, the human project there. And like, I don't know.
I think
that's how I felt.
I almost would rather have seen just the glimmer of a ship on the horizon coming out of the fog without seeing the Tomorrow, because the last sound that we hear as the credits cut is the sound of children, like laughing and playing in a way, which in and of itself kind of lends itself to this, hey, guess what? This is the sound that we haven't heard in like however many years, and it's like this is life. Life will continue in a way. So that's how I would have interpreted it. Not
but he's an optimist. That's what we're talking about. Like he is an optimist. I think that like Cuarón is like he makes movies where he is like everything sucks. The world is fucking terrible. Like the bleak version is the Y Tu Mamá También one. And the most optimistic one is the little princess, and this one is right there riding that line where it's just like, what do we have to live for? Like there's like, for all intents and purposes, like they should all be given up. Like one of the things I love about this movie is everybody in the movie is like, we're just playing it out. Like we don't like what the fuck are we living for? Like nobody has any hope for the future. Except for the people who see this baby, right?
And isn't that how it feels to be alive right now? Like, right? Isn't that like
it really is.
Even so much more than in 2006? I think This was like made before the financial
100%.
crisis, before like so many like climate reports that have said that like if you don't meet this or this thing, like He takes, like, again, current trends, which are basically that the gulf between, poor people and people with wealth is like accelerating, and the people with nothing are being not only like have been especially people in the third world are the ones that have been like robbed of wealth for like thousands of years, and also now that they are being like driven from their homes by specifically like climate catastrophe, like flooding and stuff like that, they're moving to places with more wealth, which is like the first world, which is the places that like have built their wealth off of like the backs of like the global south. And in response to that, rather than say like, hey, there's enough for everybody, the response from like the first world is like, we need to strengthen our borders. You know what I mean? We need to like send the armies in to like keep these people down. I think wiser people saw these trends happening, a long time ago, and this movie, in my mind, just kind of like heightens those, the contradictions. It like kind of like pushes these things to their extreme, and ended up with like a pretty. Abu Ghraib had like just happened, I guess, and he uses imagery from Abu Ghraib like in those detention camps,
Right.
And I think all like so it's more just like shedding a light on like these places that exist right now. Existed back then in 2006, and
definitely
and
more
said
so
like and
exists
said
right
and
now.
then said these things are just gonna continue and grow, like these trends, and we are closer in this moment to the date of the movie Children of Men than we are to 2006, and it feels more like the film 2000. Like even if it's just in like images that we see in the news and social media, it does feel more like that world. One of the catastrophes that they talk about on the news in that movie is a pandemic that had happened. And that's what killed his
son, right?
child. Yeah.
Right.
And of course, I think it's I've read that pandemics are like more likely to happen in a Earth where the weather is like, where the climate is like at these extreme ends. You know what I mean? Like it's going to make things like that. It's going to accelerate trends like that. And is that what you were kind of getting at, Ian? Like a future that's more just like sort of a caricature of like contemporary life, or?
I think that's basically what I was getting at. It was more thinking, sort of trying to articulate a future where there's no optimism at all, and it's just like almost exactly like where we're at right now, except for that nobody has any hope for the future.
Yeah,
in a weird way.
having the thing where like literally you can't have children is such a brilliant idea, because it makes that feeling of hopelessness that's so prevalent. It like dramatizes that so perfectly, and that's why bringing the kid, having one child again dramatizes that idea of like that, like the power of life, the beauty and like miracle of life, and how everyone can appreciate that on some deep level, like even all these soldiers that are just fighting in this crazy war. But it also dramatizes the way that we like go through life, like people still go to work in that future. You know what I mean? People still like have to pay their bills and stuff like that. They still have to like pretend like there's any point to anything, and that is like, why would you do that? It's so hopeless. But then you turn around and look at your own life and look at all the trends that are happening now. It's a really brilliant idea, and I'm so glad they made it into a movie.
And the fact that like there's such political turmoil, it's like in the midst of everybody realizing like we're done, we've got 20 years or 50 years or whatever left, and like they're still arguing for who's in power the whole time. You know what I mean? Like everybody's trying to be on top.
But that's another great point. It's like there is a myth that like, oh, if things got so bad that we'd all come together and make it better. Like I think we've seen enough now that we know that that's not true. Right. And this movie called it a long time ago. Like, you know what I mean? There's no point where we're going to say, oh, well, there's no hope for somebody to win at this point, really. Like, let's just, give people what we can for the time we have left. No. Borders are closed. You know what I mean? Get in the camp so that I can still have my,
And, specifically the book. So this was based on a book that came out in the 90s. You guys haven't read it?
No.
I read it when this movie came out. I kind of remember it. I thought about like re-perusing it for this podcast, and then I didn't. But it's written by a woman, which is important for the title, I think, mostly because the book deals a lot more with feminism and like, well, we'll get into that. I want to get into that more in a little bit, but it does deal with political sort of problems that are happening. The book does, So this one, they took the bones of the book, which is like people can't be born anymore, or global infertility, and then sort of how that plays out in the world, and then they just like added on to it most of the like immigration stuff and all that kind of thing, so like all of that was sort of the movies thing,
And it's really cool that this movie comes from like a Mexican director who is really going to be really conscious of that kind of stuff. Yeah, so cool.
No,
I like how we jumped right to the end in the meeting of the movie before we haven't even like talked about almost anything. But go ahead, Chris.
No, you mentioned the title of the movie, and that was actually something that I wanted to ask you guys about. I'm not sure. It feels like a biblical kind of a statement, or I'm not sure where it even comes from, but it had me thinking. Children of Men, and what's the significance of the title? You guys think? Why did he choose that? Like, children don't come from men, right? But
again, that's more of a book thing, because the book deals a lot with this idea that men, like, are the world is torn apart by like a feminist revolution in the book, rather than like a immigration revolution or whatever you want to call it, like an immigration,
just the act of immigration and the defense against it.
But there's like a feminist revolution, and then the part of it that sort of shows up in the movie that kind of, I think Cuaron or whoever, one of the 4 screenwriters of this movie took, that it is interesting that like he ends up kind of teaching her how to parent in a way. Like she's got the key has this sort of preternatural like instinct for motherhood.
Sure, yeah.
But he's the one who like says like, no, you have to like
burp it. Pat its back, yeah.
Burp it, pat its back. Like he teaches her kind of thing. And like there's a lot of biblical stuff in this, like you kind of mentioned. And I can understand that part of it when you were talking about the plot not really working for you this time, is because so much of it does just feel like a sort of biblical allegory in a weird way.
Right.
But that moment was like almost like criticism of men in the book, of just like how men try to create like, or try to rule everything, and like they don't leave it to the women.
Think the word you're looking for is mansplain.
I'm gonna do that to everybody listening right now.
That's what we do.
What is interesting about this movie, especially when you have a movie that's like so steeped in a structural failing, largely, like the whole world is falling apart, and that's due to like structures and systems of power. There is no like central antagonistic bureaucrat guy or person, individual entity. It's all, again, the structures, and we have these factions of people who are vying for power, and there's different hierarchies of people in there too, but it's not like there's the overarching single nemesis bad guy, literally man, who's like, yeah, I'm imposing my will. So when I think about the title, like Children of Men, it's not as much, I wanted to kind of think about it like, oh, is this like a statement that men have ruined the world, essentially, and it doesn't feel like Cuaron's leaning in that direction. It's more just like our own failings, and it just happens to be this sort of accident of whatever nature, whatever it may be. But the absence of like a single specific personified antagonist is kind of an interesting choice. I know there's individuals who are bad, like Chiwetel Ejiofor's character ends up being a bad guy, and Charlie Hunnam's, whatever. But the structure is what we need to be criticizing, rather than an individual sitting at the top, wielding his power, so to speak.
Yes, and we've talked about this before, I think, but this movie exemplifies it beautifully. But like the idea that like it's both in the the power structures that like control our lives, and the individual actions, and how those two things kind of like play off each other, and the importance of both, or like the possibility that like one can influence the other, like, or I mean that like one person can like make a difference. And Ian, you said like you think that the movie ended with him having some hope. I mean, yeah, he goes from being like not only like hopeless, but like the whole the London of this movie, the England of this movie, is so gray and dour and kind of hopeless in general. And but he, of all people, is the most hopeless. It seems like he has had like lost the most. He like unlike his brother who has like some material comfort and stuff like that. He's and says like, oh, I just don't think about it when he like talking about the future and stuff like that. He can't help but think about it only. You know what I mean? He had hope and lost it, and he lives with this kind of like this pain and this grief of that. And by the way, the movie does all this in a very unheavy-handed way. Like it does it in a very like you're in the story, just you can pick up on these things. It doesn't like over-explain with this movie might have some of the most what do you call it exposition of a Cuarón movie, but it's still done pretty smoothly. And what was I going to say? So basically, yeah, he not only finds hope when he meets this kid with a baby, but, of course, I mean, who's going to have a baby, and kid, I don't know how young she is. She seems really young to me, but I guess over 18, but, or is she? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Who knows?
Who knows? The point is, in that moment, be it because, like, he just lost his wife, he had lost his child before, and he wanted something to believe in, but he finds something not just to have some hope in, but like literally to say, I will put my life down in service of this person and this thing. And that's the important thing, where it's like, and that is an important like Alfonso Cuarón thing, Ian, that you were talking about earlier in the podcast about like people realize, coming from a place of like, I don't care, I just want to like get about my life, and I have enough problems as it is, and realizing that their problems don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world, and that like they have to make maybe the ultimate sacrifice, and that only by doing that in service of something good that they can actually like affect real change and real meaning on the earth. And that's like a really powerful message, and this movie gets across really intensely.
Yeah, and I mean, everybody makes that choice almost everybody that meets Key makes that choice in this movie, where it's like almost immediately, even like the Polish or whoever she is, immigrant that they meet in the camp, and like Michael Caine, and there's so many people that just see her and are like, oh, I have to die for this person to live. It's like almost like an immediate choice to be like, I don't fucking care. I don't matter anymore.
Right.
Like, this is all that matters.
And that's why it's like, it's so, that's why I love this movie and the way it dramatizes that with the baby, but it's like, and with the pregnant woman, but it's like, what could do that in the real world? You know what I mean? What new kind of like movement could like kind of inspire that? And it's very...
it's impossible to imagine, isn't it?
It's hard to imagine. It's difficult to imagine.
It's impossible for me to imagine.
Because Ian, when you said like everybody makes that choice, I thought you meant in the real world. And I'm like, are you just saying we all have chosen to just to do little podcasts instead of like affecting real change in the world? Because like, I guess that's true, but damn, you didn't have to come at me like that at 10 a.m.
That's the part about this movie that, it's got this biblical part of it, right? That's like, it's definitely heavy-handed in like the score that they use in some of the parts and stuff like that, that it feels just so allegorical. And it didn't bother me at all. Like, I actually went with it and was okay with it, but it is that thing that you're asking, which is like, to the movie, I think the only thing that we could really hope for is like the second coming, right? It's like, I mean, if we're putting this in like a real world perspective, like, and I'm not looking for that. I'm not saying that I am, but I'm saying that like, that's what we're hoping for, right? Like if there's anything in this, I just mean from like what the movie's saying is like, we need like a God to follow in a weird way. Like, this baby is God. And that's not, obviously I'm going to keep backtracking and saying like, that's not where I'm coming from. But like,
well, that's not where the movie's coming from either. That's just, they're using biblical like analogies to like,
I think it is where the movie's coming from. It's definitely got that in there. Like, I don't know.
I think it's an illusion, I don't think it's like saying literally like this, I don't know.
But don't you hear like the fucking crazy chanting with the biblical score that's happening? Like, it's in there.
What do you mean when you say that the kid is is God. Like, what are you saying? Maybe I don't understand.
Well, that's the story of like the, Christian fucking idea of like the second coming is like the world has fallen apart, but like this new baby will be born.
Like Jesus comes and we are all reborn by
yeah.
virtue of the coming of Christ, essentially, where all of our sins are now forgiven and now we can start the world anew, essentially. I see where you're coming with that, but yeah, I don't know that it's that direct. The movie is peppering all over the place, different like allegories and allusions, and kind of even from the first moment we see Key and she reveals that she's pregnant, it's literally she's covering her breasts and holding her loincloth,
she does
like the birth
she's
of
doing
Venus.
The Botticelli,
It's the birth of Venus,
That's
exact
not in the
pose.
Bible.
Yeah, but I mean,
but it's biblical symbolism.
but I'm just saying in terms of its like the levels of symbolism that the movie's operating on,
Yeah, that's okay.
But yeah, I don't know that it's a direct, like, this child is Christ, per se. But I just see it as, like, the symbol of hope that will literally bring a soldier, like a hardened soldier who's just been firing at people, maybe killed somebody, to his knees. Like that pretty powerful shot toward the end where it's a POV shot. They're literally walking toward and through the sea of soldiers, and each one has its own, like, distinctive reaction. Yeah, I just see it more as a symbol of hope in the future rather than a direct, maybe, Christ allegory.
Well, I guess I'm just saying it's not a literal thing, and it's, but yeah, I understand that it's like a very clear, like.
It's
like,
not like a Left Behind,
symbolism.
like Kirk Cameron movie, but it's.
I thought that's what you were saying.
but it's if it's following any kind of story structure, it is like a biblical story structure, in a weird way. Like, anyway. Let's get away from all meaning and get into some of the like moments in this movie, because it's an incredible fucking just movie to watch. We haven't talked about like Michael Caine's performance in this movie. Can I say the only thing I didn't like about this movie is the Photoshop?
Did you say you didn't like it?
Michael Caine. The Photoshopped Michael Caine. There's like one shot. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I missed that.
You guys both missed it. Oh my god! When they first get to Michael Caine's place after you'd already met him in driving and stuff like that, they go into his house and it shows him like his face photoshopped.
Wait, I saw this. I did see
man.
this, and I actually think I might have thought that was decent Photoshop.
No, it's
Ian,
so bad.
there is so much worse Photoshop out there. Like
Wait, can you guys clarify for me for a second? What was Photoshop? I must have totally
it's
missed
basically
this.
like a newspaper, right? Picture, or like a picture from.
I think it's just a photo.
He's got longer, darker hair from like a few years back.
Yeah.
And
it's his face.
it's just some Photoshop.
Okay.
Movies do this all the time, and it's like a common occurrence that the departments that are in charge of photoshopping these images have like zero time to put them together, and they always turn out bad. They're like some of the worst things in movies that I love by David Lynch. I can think of one, the Twin Peaks: The Return. There's like a picture of the receptionist and her husband, I think, in the back, and it's literally like nightmarish, like not in a David Lynch way, just in just a terrible Photoshop like ad way. In the movie The Departed, there's a picture of the therapist, thank you. And she's just like riding a bike in front of her childhood home, and it's like literally the worst Photoshop I've ever seen. Like she probably took less time on it than I do like for the thumbnails for this podcast. And it literally just it throws you out of the movie violently. And this picture of Michael Caine, completely innocuous, totally.
No, you're wrong. It totally threw me out of it violently.
No.
I mean, it made me laugh, like, because it is. No, like,
that's called
I'll send it.
That's a suspension of disbelief moment. That's not worse than like any amount of like makeup. I mean, Ian, you're totally in your rights to have like your own reactions to it. But
anyway, he is incredible in this movie. It reminded me in his death scene, right? Mm-hmm. Of what we were talking about in Y Tu Mama Tambien, when the family that they meet on the beach, like the narrator pops in and is like, oh, by the way, they end up like as janitors in a hotel on this beach like in a year or whatever. Yeah. It's just like, you just watch it and you're like, why? Like, why do you have to fucking do this to like the one good little beacon of hope that you actually meet besides the idea of hope that's in Key? But like, he's actually living an okay life. Like, you know what I mean?
He is, but like, kind of a hypocritical life. I mean, in my mind, like there's a bonus feature on my little Blu-ray where Zizek talks at length about that character, and he like loves him so much because to him he exemplifies this kind of like aged, like impotent kind of like hippie guy is how he describes him. And it's like, I live in San Francisco where a lot of the political discourse is around like homelessness and housing. And, this guy was like supposed to some sort of like political kind of activist guy in his youth. And now he's kind of retired to this kind of like little farmhouse where he like grows weed and stuff like that. And, if he was, especially in this day, like in the time of the movie where, housing and like immigration is like the big issue like in England at the time, he's probably somebody who would be like pushing for like urbanism, right? Like high density housing and cheap housing and like, the people living together and doing that kind of work. And, maybe he's done that kind of work in the past, but now he's kind of like separated himself from it. You know what I mean? He's like no longer like trying to like live by, in my mind, this is kind of like my backstory that I invented for him, but he's not trying to like live amongst the people and stuff like that. He's not trying to live up to his ideals. He's literally stepped away from it all. He's taken like, you get the idea that he has some wealth and he's kind of like, rather than, reinvested it or something, because he didn't have kind of anything bigger than himself that he truly believed in at a core level, even though like in theory he probably agrees with all this kind of like liberal or like progressive kind of things. He has totally separated himself from it and lives in like a little cocoon outside of society. That's how I saw it.
I can get that, except for that, I mean, this is obviously parallel with climate crisis right now, but there is a part of it that's like, you get to a certain point, especially if you're of a certain age, where you're like, we're all dead. Like, what are we fighting for anymore? And I think,
right,
that, like,
and I think that's
the reality of this movie. Like, he's there. You could easily look at it the way you are, and there's plenty of old hippies around where I live that like maybe fought for something. Maybe it was from a vanity perspective. Who knows? But like they maybe did 30 years ago, and now they just drive their Teslas and do their thing.
And I'm not saying, I'm not saying like he's a bad person. I'm just saying I think that's what he represents in the movie. I think he's somebody who he got his, and he's just like, he's going to take care of his wife and just smoke pot and be on his own and have his one little friend.
In the world of this movie, even I, as like a staunchly liberal person, was like, just die. Like just go about your business until you're dead. Like, what are we fighting for here? You know what I mean?
It's
like,
totally. I'm not saying it's not understandable.
Arguments.
I think he represents that inclination. Like, I mean, and I'm not saying like I'm not saying that's not what I would do. I'm just saying like I think that's what he represents in the movie.
Because then you get the activists that are in this movie, right? Fish, right?
Who
or
suck.
The fishes, whatever they're called. And you're like, do you want him to be one of them? Like,
No,
they're
exactly,
the worst,
exactly.
You know what I mean?
And that's. I think all these things represent these different kind of like inclinations and different forces, and I think his is totally understandable. But it is such the power of his kind of like, no, you guys go ahead. You know what I mean? Like, and he's so enlivened by that. It's like he's brought back to life. It's like that little spark that he had has been reignited, and it's like that's a really amazing moment to me in the movie.
Well, to that point, and speaking of Michael Caine, and with respect to Alfonso Cuaron, he is kind of separate in the movie, and because also I think about some of the themes of Cuaron being green. One of them is not a large theme of this movie, but one of the times you see green, of course, is when we approach Michael Caine's house. You cover up it's covered in leaves and trees and things like that. So, I mean, it's one of the few glimpses of actual nature and the green that you see of the world that otherwise would be enveloped in this gray, dingy kind of disrepair of a world of urban London, right? So he certainly is removed both physically and I guess maybe thematically in a way.
Yes.
But yeah, I was just thinking about the color green. I'm like, well, only I can
That's
really
a
imagine.
good point. I hadn't
Michael
even
Caine.
realized that while I was watching it, actually, despite the fact that it's all I think about is the green thing when I'm watching a movie for this podcast. But like, it is funny that like, in a weird way in the beginning of the movie, that place, the green of it all, represents this sort of beacon of hope, this not beacon of hope, but like this beacon of solace that he has from the actual world around him. Right? He goes there, they're laughing, they're like smoking pot and doing their jokes and listening to fucking crazy dubstep death metal shit and like And then, but that's like the moment where they get invaded. Who the fuck knows how they find it? And that place gets invaded, and that is not the beacon of hope. It's just like this weird, like fantasy of hope that does
exactly. And that's,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important that like you can think that you've created this little thing outside society, but you're never outside society. You know what I mean? And that's the kind of like hypocrisy, I guess, of it.
Yeah. Then we've got Julianne Moore.
Well, can I say something about like all these like
Yeah,
star performances? Like once again, like just like Y Tu Mama Tambien, there's like zero close-ups in this film. You know, the way he shoots this is like, you know, kind of fly on the wall. The camera's like swirling around everybody, keeping everybody at a distance. If I was Charlie Hunnam in this movie, I would be pissed because with that, like those white dreads he's got on, you could not tell that was him, and he's got like scars on his face. Like if the camera got within like 5 feet of him, you'd be like, oh, is that Charlie Hunnam? Not even close. Totally. Not even close.
I did not know that it was him until after I watched the movie.
He's just an angry, like Tasmanian devil-looking dude.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, the whole film, if you think about it, there's not one moment in the film, not one frame or shot that is outside of Clive Owens' perspective, right? Every bit of information we get is literally him in the frame, standing back, watching or listening to something. So there's not a lot of close-ups because, like, we don't have that specific. We're not as close to Clive Owen, but we're also right next to him. It's like we are him in a way, but we can't see what he sees exactly.
I think you're right. Close to the mark on that, because I think that you're actually, it's almost like he's a war photographer and the camera is not following his perspective, but following around like you're following him around. You know what I mean? Like
right.
It's never like the way the little princess is so clearly Sarah's perspective, and everything is shot almost from her eyes a lot of the time.
True, yeah.
Or her eye line, you know, whatever. And then this one is like, it just weaves around him, like, you know, that first opening shot, which we should just talk about that shot.
Amazing.
Like, briefly, because it starts inside of a cafe without him, you know, and it's sort of telling you, like you said, expositorily telling you about what the world is like now. And you see these people who are all devastated by the death of baby Diego, the youngest person who was alive. And then he walks in, isn't as affected by it because, as you mentioned already, Travis, like he's just like, you know, it's he's done. Like he's done.
Yeah.
And he buys this coffee, and the whole thing is just like the things that the camera follows. It's following the TV, then it like catches him and it follows him through it, and then it like, you know, it's following him for a little while as he pours his drink. And then all of a sudden, like, the camera reacts to the explosion and, like, moves toward the explosion as if it didn't know that it was going to happen, you know? And so the whole movie's shot like that as the cafe blows up, you know? Mm-hmm. And it's just, the whole movie, especially in those last final extended long shots of the battle in the immigration camp, that's like, you know, it's so incredibly choreographed. Where the fuck did this movie come from? That was one of the things that I was talking about, like thinking about watching this movie of like, he hasn't done action before. Like you mentioned it earlier, Chris, but like, you know, Harry Potter was the closest thing he's done to sort of an adventure action movie. And there's no action in that Harry Potter movie. Like, well, you know, almost none.
What there is long sequences of like real time kind of, action. I would call it action, but like, and that's what this movie has. You know, there are in a film, like it's really easy to like pump up the tension through editing and stuff like that. This movie, where Alfonso Cuaron is actually credited as the co-editor, which is really cool. Rather than use editing and montage to like create tension, he does like the opposite and just like puts you in the space like for the time that something's happening, and just from time passing and almost the lack of cutting, that is what builds the tension. And I'm thinking specifically of the sequence where he like steals the cars, and it's very almost like mundane, and you hold on these shots for like so long compared to any other movie you've ever seen in your life. And the car is like rolling down and you're seeing these people run around and the camera's flashing a little bit, but it's not going crazy. It's just really staying with him in these cars, and by the end of it, you're like kind of on the edge of your seat as the car's not starting. And it's like, if you kind of just wandered into the room, you wouldn't know that you're watching like an incredibly tense action sequence. It's very, very uniquely shot and edited and put together.
The camera feels scared in those moments. Like, it almost feels like it's hiding behind the cars with them. Like, holy shit, how are we fucking doing this
It
right
is.
now? Like,
But
it's like a documentary almost, like especially that one of the last ones where we're literally in the city and he's literally taking cover here, he takes cover there, he eventually goes into the bus, he walks into the entire building. It's literally crouching down with him and kind of like sprinting across the street, like literally like he's got a documentarian like following him, you know, like not just some overarching floating camera.
Like he's like,
it's scared
it feels
too.
like war documentary footage, you know what I mean? Like, where
Absolutely. And it's like, and it's not as, again, some of these kind of like, this was, when you said, where did this movie come from? I have two answers for that. There was like this found footage revolution that happened kind of like post Blair Witch Project. So I think you can like honestly look at the Blair Witch Project as like a forefather of this movie in a way. And then also, I asked you guys to watch Cuarón's Paris Je T'aime short. I don't know if you got around to doing it, but that I didn't watch it either. But well, I knew you guys weren't, so
I did. I said I did.
yeah, right. So, by the way, like, it's just so funny when you say where did this come from, though. The movies that were coming out in 2006 compared to this movie, like, this is just like in another world. I'm thinking like what came out around that time, like. Especially like dealing with the idea of like war and stuff, like In the Valley of Ella or some stupid shit. Like this is like it was so ahead of its time, and I know it didn't do well in the theaters. And I'm glad it's been kind of like vindicated over time because Jesus, what a great movie. But my point is, I really feel like that Paris Je T'aime short that he did, which is like one shot, just like walking down a street, was just like an opportunity for him to really practice this idea of just like staying like in one time. In one without any edits, and just like what kind of tension or drama can you build with that, and I don't know, I think he was really pushing that kind of style, and I think kind of Roma is like the ultimate version of what came out of that short in particular, you know. But this is like sort of the I don't know if bad to say it's like the Hollywood version, you know, but this is like the sort of more dramatic version, the more
I think the Hollywood
narrative
version is Gravity, right? Because it's got that Gravity's got that opening 25 minutes or whatever it is. I mean, we'll talk about it next week, but like that are amping up the tension in that single shot where it's just like I don't know.
Yeah. Good point. I'm gonna have to rewatch Gravity. It's really like only certain parts like stick out in my mind. It's I don't remember a lot of it, but yeah.
We're running out of time. I do want to talk about Julianne Moore. I think she's such a great part of this movie because she lends this sort of star power that, you know, maybe it's just me being a huge Julianne Moore fan, but there's something about her. I don't know. I loved seeing her like come in and like, she's just a great actress. I don't know what else to say. She's a great actress. And when she dies so quickly, every character that we bring up so far was like, and when they die, you know, because it just keeps happening. But like when she dies, I remember seeing it in the theater and being like, holy fucking shit. Like, no, not yet. You can't do that. You can't introduce this like brief moment of happiness for him and then just fucking kill it right away. Like he has this 1 second of flinging ping pong balls from mouth to mouth. And like, they're like, oh, you think that you're going to get to be happy? Sorry. She's literally going to get shot and her blood is going to get splattered across your face. Like, goodbye. It's fucking brutal. It's so brutal. He's so fucking brutal in this movie.
Yeah.
Agreed?
Agreed.
Who else is in? I mean, Clive Owen, you know, he hasn't really exploded the way that he should have, I think, because he's a powerhouse in this movie. You know, this was like almost the end of his career, even though he hadn't done, I don't know, he mostly did TV after this movie, I think. Right?
I don't know. I haven't followed Clive's career, but I always have like a warm spot in my heart for him just from this movie. It's really the only movie like of his that I'm even like aware of.
Sin City, maybe?
Oh yeah, that's right.
Well, leading up to this, he'd done like Sin City, and he was in a great movie, Croupier. Did you ever see that one?
No, but I know, doesn't he have like a shaved head in that? Maybe I'm wrong.
No, he's in that. He's in that one. I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, and like he's in a few things. But then he did like Closer and King Arthur. He was King Arthur in one of those shitty King Arthur movies. But then he makes this movie, and kind of like the thing was he was front runner in my mind for James Bond when
Right.
Daniel Craig got James Bond, and
Right.
then that didn't happen, and he kind of just, went. Now he makes a lot of TV shows, I think, but God, he's so fucking good in this movie. He carries the movie, like literally, like you said, Chris, like every shot of this movie.
And you know what? He doesn't say a lot. He doesn't it's really hard to be like the POV character, where you don't talk a lot and you're just supposed to like be the audience in some way, right? And like kind of carry them through a story. And, the guy from, I can't remember his name, Daniel, something like from Get Out is another one who does it. Like
Kaluuya, right.
barely talks and yet has the kind of magnetism to like carry off the performance. And so whenever I notice that in a movie, I'm always like, good job. You know what I mean? And so
one of the great
I really I feel like it really
nuances-
bonds you to the actor. You know what I mean? And it's like when it's done like decently, it's always really impressive to me.
one of the great choices, I should say, it's a nuance, but I guess it's more just like a choice. Maybe it's a Cuarón choice, but like, is that Clive Owen plays it so scared. Like he's never, for a guy that's as hopeless as he is for the most part, he never is like, I want to die.
No.
Like, I mean, he's
No.
like, every time that there's guns around him, he gets this fear in his eyes. And, and it's like real,
Right,
it's
right.
like, you're feeling it too.
I mean,
where
maybe
you're
that's part of like
he's
why.
fucked.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was gonna say it's interesting to have a main character in a movie with so many guns who never even touches a gun at all. That's kind of interesting. And
Yeah, I mean,
considering
that was-
the characters he's also played, like I said, Shoot 'Em Up is literally him shooting everybody all the
Well, he's
time.
Bugs Bunny
Sin
in that
City,
movie. That's the Bugs Bunny movie where
Bugs Bunny doesn't have
exactly.
a
It's like a
gun.
human cartoon movie. Yeah, exactly.
No, but like they're playing Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd, and like it's a fucking
It's a cartoon.
But I kind of
But
It's a cartoon.
but yeah, I think that's why it's like really hard to imagine like a normal Hollywood star playing this role, because you know what I mean. Like there would be like you just like
Right.
kind of go into action mode in some way. But I feel like Clive Owen. Maybe it is just because of like what we're used to in these kind of movies, but I feel like every time he speaks, almost he says something that you're not expecting too. Like he seems like a real character, like a kind of complicated character, and like he's cynical and funny when the moment doesn't call for it. He's scared and just like kind of panicked when you don't expect him to. When you expect him to like
Right.
kind of
Yeah,
take
yeah.
control, but he's also really cool, right? He's like a cool dude, and like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
you can count on him, and so it's a really complicated, interesting character, even though again he
And-
barely says anything.
I agree.
And he also plays a realistic drunk. Like he doesn't. It's not. His alcoholism is so telegraphed to you throughout the movie, and even to like the unsubtleness of him like washing off his hands with the last of his alcohol, to give birth to the baby. He does for as much as that is telegraphed to you, like it's never played as like, I don't know, it just feels very real. Like
Right.
it feels like just a choice of his, or an aspect of his resignation to life. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and when he pours alcohol in the hands, it's like he's making a choice to like kind of like not get drunk
Choose
in that
life.
moment. And I was like, yeah, that's nice. When you said like, I don't know if this was Cuarón's direction or Clive's choice as an actor, I just read actually on just IMDb trivia that like when Clive Owen was brought onto the project, he pitched a bunch of ideas to Cuarón about the character, and as you mentioned, sort of the script had gone through several drafts and stuff, so they were still throwing stuff out there. And I think even during the production, I heard Cuarón was like still getting ideas and trying to push things in. It was a very chaotic and stressful production. But anyway, Clive Owen's ideas, like every one of them, basically, Cuarón was like, oh, hell, like that's exactly what we're looking for. Like they needed that Clive Owen element to kind of bring that character to life.
Yeah,
and he
Right.
incorporated basically all that stuff into the movie, from my understanding. So, yeah.
There were 3 specific reactions of his that I'm like, this is really great. First is when he actually discovers that she's pregnant. He's just kind of awestruck, and everyone else is like, yeah, we get it. But he's like, such a great reaction. The second one is when they pull the hood off of his head after he's abducted first by the fish. He's like, where am I? And the yellow light
Yes.
shining in his face. Like, that's a great, otherwise, most action movies or quote action movies would be like, a stone face, like, where am I? Whatever. You know what I mean?
right,
But
exactly.
that's a great reaction. And then the third, and I think this is probably to your point about where they kind of improvise or use some of his like feedback, is some of the times that he steps on something, he's like, oh shit, or fuck, because he's wearing flip flops. Like he's got these flip flops on in this war zone. You know what I mean? He's like stepping on jagged rocks. Like, oh god, these little subtle details like that really lend him
all
to
of those
believable
moments
character.
add so much to the tension of the movie too. I mean, I watched it with Angela, and she like kept diving her head into the pillow. Like, I just can't watch this part because it's just like, why do you want to live with that much stress when especially the car stealing part, where, you know, I'll just go back to it really quick because it is, I had that moment too where you're like you feel it in your fucking butterflies in your stomach, and you're just like, what, don't do this to me. Like, why am I putting myself through this tension? And there was that moment, like you said, when he steps on the thing, and Angela literally looked at me just like, oh no, is his foot gonna be hurt now? I'm like, no, he's gonna be okay, don't worry.
Yeah, he's always got a bullet in him, like, yeah, he'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I just say one last kind of off the wall, off the cuff sort of thing?
Unfortunately, not. No.
Okay.
Wait, no. What do you got? I got last thought.
No, I'm just gonna say it's ridiculous, but it's unfortunate. Like, this poor little baby is going to be like the first baby born, and it's going to be completely deaf. Like, they didn't try to cover this kid's ears at all. I mean, think about it. I just got back from Texas, and I was firing just some handguns, you know, regular 9mm, even a 45, and we had full-on ear mufflers. This kid is having automatic weapons fired right next to his head, explosions going off. This poor baby is going deaf.
Well, it's baby Jesus, so don't worry about him. He's gonna be okay.
That's one of the few. That's one of the only moments of like reverse shot in this movie is when Chiwetel Ejiofor and Clive Owen are in that room, and he's like, and they're kind of like just kind of looking at the baby, and they're both kind of like deciding its fate, basically. And that's one of the, just like in Y Tu Mamá También, right? There were like only 2 moments where they kind of like stopped and just did a reverse shot, and that was one of them. And yeah, it's interesting.
We're fucking running out of time.
We have all the time in the world.
I'll also cut out half the things I've talked about. Do we want to talk at all about the race blind, whatever you call it, the blind casting of this movie? Like, there's a lot of color in this movie, which is great. Like, it's a Cuarón thing. Like,
I wouldn't call it race blind, though, right? I mean, that's just...
Well...
I know what you mean, I think.
Multicultural view of London. That's probably pretty accurate to the...
I just mean race blind compared to most Hollywood movies.
But I'm saying blindness has nothing to do with it, I'm saying. I guess.
They call that, though, right? That's what they call that, where they're like, they go out for actors and they don't care about what race they are. I think that
okay.
I don't think that he was like, I want Luke to be a black guy. Like, I think they just got Chiwetel Ejiofor, and he's an incredible actor, and they're like, yeah, he's right for this role, And there is a lot of color in this movie, and it does seem to be like the only one, that feels somewhat significant is Key, I guess, being a young black girl. But
she's not being treated any differently, per se, right? Is that what you mean? Like,
not for her skin color,
right? Just for her refugee status, if nothing else.
Exactly, and I think that's like, I mean, it's just I bring it up because it's one of those things that, like I said, I had this sort of come to Jesus moment.
Come to Froley moment.
Come to Key moment for Cuarón. What was the name of the baby?
Froley was the name for a boy, and then Bazooka was the name for the girl.
Yeah, but then it ends up being something like Miles or something.
Dylan?
No, it's not Miles.
Dylan.
Is it?
Dylan, the name of their baby, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I had to come to Dylan moment for Cuarón, where I was like, it's really special to me to have this filmmaker on our podcast that, like, out the gates made a fucking movie about, the AIDS crisis, whether or not it's aged well, but it, like, it plays with that without, like, or I should say, it actively tries not to make a gay thing, right? It's like a political statement in a weird way.
Yes, no, it is.
Then he has this moment in Y Tu Mamá También where he's like, I'm going to have these 2 characters kiss. It's not going to be at all,
played for laughs.
Commenting on, yeah, it's just going to be like a story point, basically. And like, it's, anyway.
I'm realizing that for my Y Tu Mamá También thumbnail, I should have done like a take on Road Trip, that movie. Done the shot of them kissing, maybe.
yeah.
And then have DJ Qualls in the background, like, what up? I'm doing like alternate thumbnails for every episode. I'm just this is really my imagination's going.
I just mean to say that, like, especially after this one, where it's just he's so clearly more politically.
He's extremely politically conscious,
or
and
left-minded, then-
his political views are good, in my opinion.
And the fact that like we just did Coen Brothers, who it drained me watching them make movies with 75 white people, you know, and this one is just like, it does feel like an active choice to be like, no, like London has black people. Like we'll show a lot of black people, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's why I kind of
Like,
was questioning your use of the term colorblind, because it seemed like a very like a conscious thing, not to just mean like the not defaulting to white people. Yeah, like
Right.
I don't know.
Maybe more neutral. Like let's.
I'll think of a better term, but
yeah, I obviously I don't mean colorblind in terms of like it didn't matter that they were, but
Right.
certainly for some of the characters it didn't matter. Like
because
it
isn't that
just
the
was
argument that
more-
like, oh, we just cast the best person for the role, they're just all white because like, you know what I mean? Like I don't know.
and that's the ridiculousnk
Right.
argument, you
Right.
know, and like the reality is that most people just have like the default human in their mind being a 38-year-old white guy.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like when they're casting a movie.
I wonder if the decision to cast Key as a white woman would have made the decision for them to not go public with the baby a little bit more challenging at all. I don't know.
That's true. That's true.
Because,
That's
oh my
yeah,
gosh,
that's a-
you know,
that's a
because there may
story
be, I
reason.
think, the savior of all of humanity is a black girl.
But they
basically.
also mentioned that.
Maybe.
But they also mentioned that they could take the baby, find a posh black woman, and pass it off as hers.
That's
and
what
that
they-
and that's like and that's I think that that line points to the fact that while clearly most of the people being rounded up and put in these camps are like third world refugees, like people of color. There is also like a class element where, oh, these are the wrong white people, these are the right black people.
Yeah.
So there's,
Fair
you know what I
enough.
mean? There are these kind of like exit points
there is-
where these power structures exist, and looking at things through only a racial lens is actually misleading, and that's
I
where
think,
kind of like
like-
intersectionality comes in.
Yeah,
I think
and
it's a good
that
point.
The only time that they mention race in the movie is, and it could be a part of the movie, especially in 2006 when that was a bigger issue than immigration in the public's mind. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like that could have easily been what the war was about, with like all the black people in one. Like they could have done that, and
Yeah, and I think it was really forward thinking that they didn't, because again, there's like
they
limits.
didn't exactly, and that's really great. And on the contrary, the only time that they mention race is when they say like, "Oh, we're gonna get a posh black lady," like you
Yeah,
said. Like
yep.
it almost does feel like, in a futuristic way, like race kind of did like stop mattering in a weird
No,
way
because you
to
could make that
some
argument.
people.
Because you could make that argument today. I mean, that's the argument that like conservatives make. It's like, well, this black person is conservative. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this black person is successful. Like, why aren't you? You know what I mean? Like, again, I think it's a matter of like, I don't think it's.
Yeah,
I think you could find a posh black lady today, and I think all these problems you could paste onto like today's world, and it would be exactly the same. And looking at things through like only a lens of race, or only or only class even, is like can be a way of
Well, it's just
limiting
short-sighted.
what you're seeing, because these issues all kind of intersect in ways that are knowable, but only through like a Marxist framework, with other things on top. Speaking of Marxism, I guess like I thought it was interesting that the place where the brother lives, his like giant mansion with his like private art collection of like masterpieces that have been like privatized, used to be like an industrial center, right? Like the industry has been like just removed entirely from the country,
Right.
and just turned into like a private dwelling. I just thought that was like an interesting point. And also Ian talking about how sort of politically enlightened Cuarón is. There is, I think, something pointing to Cuarón's like controversial and maybe offensive beliefs in this movie, which is the treatment of the autistic son of his brother.
Oh yeah.
So Alfonso Cuarón directed a commercial for this group called Autism Speaks, and the group is like very controversial because they basically, it was founded by like these like the CEO of like GE or something like that, and because he had like a grandchild who was autistic, and their whole approach to raising awareness and raising funds for treating autism is to like treat it like a disease, and like to and there's like they have like a giant board and stuff like that, and there's a lot of really wealthy corporate donors and people on the board. 0 of them are on the autism spectrum apparently, and like if you watch the Alfonso Cuaron commercial that he made, it's pictures of autistic kids and saying like, look at like these horrible monsters. Right. It's like it's pretty offensive, and it becomes even more upsetting to learn for me that like Cuaron has an autistic son, and you know, I don't know, it's just kind of a weird, like watching this commercial, you can see why apparently a lot of autistic people, autistic activists have said this isn't helping. This is like actually stigmatizes people with autism. It's not a disease. It's just like a condition that people live with. You're not going to find their whole thing is like, we have to find a cure for autism, or like, there is no cure for how our brains work.
Yeah,
that's just
for
like
different people.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to point that out, because like I think the movie, the moment works in the movie because you feel like, you know, he's become this like kind of hybrid machine phone game playing youth, and that is such like a powerful like image today, where like kids are just like plugged into their phones. We feel like we've built these machines that kind of cater to like the worst impulses of our brains, and he's just like trapped in this kind of like dimension where he's just like in his phone. And so I think that moment still works, but just I could see how somebody with like autism or somebody who's like sensitive to the portrayal of people with autism in a film could be like, that's actually offensive. So yeah, you're not off the hook, Cuaron.
But the scene, that specific scene with his brother, is like the clearest, most stark commentary on class and the divisions of the haves and the have-nots, especially than anything. To literally have the actual David in your home, just casually just sitting there, you know, where no one will ever see it. Or the Guernica, like the entire Picasso Guernica, like that's a significant piece just sitting there.
Wasn't that, was it like explicit in the movie, or is it something I'm just remembering from the book, that he's like a art, like the way that he gets the papers to them and like his role in that society is that like he basically has like an arc that brings art to London from other places, because, you know, like the rest of the world is in chaos, and like that's what he traffics in, basically, is like fancy art.
Maybe it's like implied. I don't think it's really explicitly stated, but like even so, just having it in your house is like, or living in that space is just like a little like,
and treating it like it is. Yeah.
I mean, it's just like at his dinner table is Guernica, and meanwhile, like, you know, and he's just like, Guernica, like drinking his wine. Meanwhile, like Guernica is happening like outside his door, right? And there's no connection to that, right? And he's just like, I literally don't think about how the world is falling apart, even though I stare at this artwork that is like supposed to be this like, you know, eye-opening masterpiece. And I think that too is like a statement of like the limits of art, and like the, you know what I mean, like the limits of any kind of, you know, nowadays there's this really powerful urge to like watch the right media or like consume the right like political product and be like, I watched a movie with like a good political message, I'm one of the good ones. And I think this movie is explicitly saying there is no political like success through consumption. Like there's no, you can't, you know, that's all I would say.
To your point earlier, also, Travis, about Michael Caine's character, he was a political cartoonist. He made art basically that touches on like politics, and now he's kind of removed from it too, in a way, right?
Exactly.
So he just chooses to not see it, just like the brother chooses not to look at it, even though it's literally right in front of his face. So
and he is sort of like, I think, a different case than the brother, because he like, again, still talks about politics. Like he's very high-minded about politics, and he's on all the right sides in theory. But in practice, he might as well not exist, right? He's not in the scrum.
Right.
What a great, rich film.
Yeah.
I came to this conversation like bleary-eyed and sleepy, and I was like, I have nothing to say, but like, you just can't help but be inspired by those visuals.
One last thing is the dogs in the movie. I love how fucking many animals
or the
are
cats,
in this movie too.
like the kitten crawling up Clive Owen's leg was literally, the first time I saw it, the most indelible image that's stuck in my mind.
Yeah.
Like
it's such an extreme sort of shot for this movie.
And it feels like it's that's like the only close up in the movie, right? Is that cat? Is that kitten?
It is. It's on that cat's face.
And it feels like a YouTube video. And that's what I feel like this movie. You said, where did it come from? I think he was so ahead of his time in like sort of internal, like subsuming like Fox News media stuff, Blair Witch style found footage stuff, YouTube video, like cell phone video stuff, and I feel like that all is used so beautifully in this film. Like really a revolutionary movie in my opinion.
Absolutely. Sort of like I said, it feels like he can make literally any movie he wants after, like, and if we follow, his filmography, which we have, what's up next? Literally anything you want.
Yeah. I felt like the footage of the dogs was very tied to him being from Mexico, though. Like, the way that the dogs were in the streets felt so much like Mexican dogs, you know what I mean? They're just always sort of out and about. Yeah. And, in the book, the dogs become the new children, so dogs are like carried around in baby Bjorns. And, like, they
interesting.
Become really, so like I thought it was interesting that they took like dogs become literally like the new face of hope for humanity because they can still keep breeding for some reason, and so like humans, pet owners are just putting all of their love into these dogs.
That makes sense.
And I thought it was interesting, like this movie kept that aspect of it, but like the dogs are still fucking crazy and running around and like feel somewhat dangerous in a weird way. Like,
it does feel like that animals are going to outlive us and that like the earth will still go on even as we've like killed ourselves, which is like, again, maybe another kind of hopeful Cuarón touch. Yeah.
We got to start rating these movies because it's been a while.
Sounds good.
You guys got any other last final thoughts?
Awesome movie.
Just that it's great. Yeah, it's great.
But yeah, like I mean, just one more time, just the camera work and those long takes and those battle sequences. Really wonderful, really incredible, so unique, so powerful.
I think I think you're right. Like he took those shots from Harry Potter, maybe that idea. Like Harry Potter was almost a training ground for him to do that sort of like extended following somebody around kind of thing. I also think he took like the screens moving around. Like that's the only futuristic sort of stuff is like everywhere he goes, there's like a billboard with moves, and that's very much from Harry Potter too.
Totally.
I got that. But yeah, I mean he clearly like this is a step forward in that sort of department for sure in terms of the camera work.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna rate him.
Rank them.
Number 1. Y Tu Mama, Tambien. It hit me so fucking hard. Easy. I don't know that it's just never going down. I don't think it's so fucking good. Number 2, Children of Men. I love it. Then The Little Princess. Then Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Then Solo con tu pareja, and then Great Expectations.
It's funny. I have it written down as I did. That's exactly the same order. I'm not even going to belabor it. Nicely done, Ian. What you got? Travis?
I have not written it down because it's like 5 movies. You guys, come on.
It's 6
movies.
So my rating.
You better write it down. There's 6 of them.
Number 1, Little Princess. Number 2, I'm going to do a tie. This movie and Y Tu Mama Tambien. I think both of those movies, like you said, they're kind of like a little pair in my mind. Like. I haven't really thought about it enough to like make my kind of parallels, spell them out, but those two are just so good, so incredible. And I did have such a wild experience watching Y Tu Mama Tambien this time that I wouldn't have thought that it would be at the same level as Children of Men, but now I kind of love them in a similar way. And then 4, Harry Potter. 5, Solo con tu pareja. 6, Great Expectations. But that dip between Harry Potter and Solo con tu pareja, that's a big drop. That's a big drop. I want to edit in like a moment of silence or something between those two. But that's the ranking, easy. And I'm very curious to see where the next 2 fall. Because I've only seen Roma and Gravity the one time in theaters.
Me too.
So
Same.
I'm excited to revisit both of them.
I had a profound experience with Roma when I watched it, and I'm excited to see that one again and see.
Me too.
I have a feeling I know where Gravity is going to wind up on this list, but we'll see. I don't know.
And on that note,
good talk, guys.
Thanks again, film friends. See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Auteur Detour. We'll see you again next week.
My ears are still ringing from earlier.
Ah, well, a little Zen music won't bother you then, will it? Bye.